and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, I come, just as I am, and waiting not to rid my soul of one dark blot, to thee, whose blood can cleanse each spot, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. All to Jesus I surrender. All to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him, in His presence daily live. I surrender all to Thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all.
Well, I was born in 1943. My dad was fighting World War II at the time. But anyway, we were born, and we lived in, Mom and us kids lived in Newton, Illinois at the time. And I grew up with my cousin Bob Field. So there's three of us that were real close. My brother and Bob and I were the three grandkids that were closest together. And we were more or less raised together for the first few years of our life. Ma'am, a grandmother who we all loved and adored and almost worshipped till the day she died, raised us, and we lived with her and our mom at the same time while Dad was in the service, right close to Bob and Bernice Fields. His mother was Bernice, and his dad was Warren Field. But anyway, we lived near together. We were raised together. We did things together. We played together. And then in 1946, one summer, nice summer, hot day, we're out playing and having a good time, splashing in some mud puddles and things, and what little kids do, naturally. Then a day or so later, I suddenly got a fever. Temperature started rising, and of course I got sick, and everybody was concerned, and they called the doctor. And those days, the doctors would make house calls, and the doctor in the little town of Newton, he didn't know what was going on. For days and days went by, and all I had to do was cry and whine. And so the doctor said he thought I had polio, but he wasn't sure. So naturally, when the suspicion like polio in the early 1900s was around, the first thing they did was quarantine everybody in the family. My cousins and I all had to be quarantined, and my brother for about a month or 60 days, I forget the time. And of course, I don't remember any of this stuff. It's just been told to me. And that I was taken to St. John's Hospital in Springfield, Illinois, when I was about 3 years old. Of course, they finally gave the diagnosis over there that I had polio. So I had polio for the rest of my life. But anyway, so my life was varied because of that. After having polio, of course, I had many operations in regards to that. I had like 13 operations before I was 12 years old. And it seems like every summer I'd check out of school for the summer break and check into the hospital for some surgeries so that I could be ready to go back to school in the fall. And this is the way I wanted it. I didn't want to miss school. I liked to be in school. I liked to be with my friends. And that's the way we did it. In the early years, in that time, we were disabled people were segregated. We were put in special schools just with other disabled kids. So as a group, we all kind of grew up together in grade school, junior high, and high school because we all always stayed together in the same class. Even there'd be 3 or 4 classes in one room at the time. So 3 or 4 grade levels would grow up together from grade school through high school. So that brought a closeness with your fellow disabled person, you might say. And in the 1960s, I think it was, they opened the door and start putting kids in regular classrooms for part of the day at least. And so they called that mainstream, so I was able to go out into the general population of the school and go to regular classrooms and classmates and interact with other students, and which is a very appreciated and needed change in the system. As a teenager, my attitude was one of I didn't believe in God, I didn't believe in eternity, I believe if there's any heaven, it's here, if there's hell, or here. So I really didn't have any faith at all. We didn't go to church. We didn't believe anything related to church things at all. As a family, the family I was raised in was a very dysfunctional family. A family that was not really into birthdays or anything like that, or caring or like giving to other things or other people. It was a very self-centered family in a lot of things. But my dad provided well for the family. He had a good job, and we never went without food or housing or anything like that. Our basic needs were always taken care of. So my brother and I grew up in that kind of situation. That's probably my grandmother on my dad's side. My dad's mother she had a nickname for me. She called me Smiley. And she said I was always smiling. I didn't notice this so much, but she said I was always smiling. And we as kids and grandkids, as we got older, we got kind of hung together as a group, even in our teenage years especially. And everywhere everybody else went, of course, I was there too. And, of course, my brother would take me in the wheelchair and take me everywhere he went just about. So, it was Rodney would do that. And we were close as brothers. And then my cousins and I would all go out together and wherever we were as teenagers. I remember going across the road uptown, going to a restaurant one night. After going to a theater with dates, it was snow. Snow was knee-high to a tall Indian. And I was digging my way through the snow with my crutches and braces, and they were helping me across the street and everything. And I still remember that. So we did things together, and I was accepted more or less into the group, and didn't see any real rejection in that area. And so I was known as Smiley because I had a good time with it. I was a joker. I was telling jokes all the time in class. I was laughing all the time, pulling pranks on everybody, and making everybody else's life miserable sometime with my antics. I was always singing songs that I couldn't sing, or all the words to which I didn't know the words to, and I made them up, some of them. So anyway, so so I was known to kind of joke with the class. I was always flirting with the girls and carrying on about them and pulling their hair, and just typical kid stuff with young girls. And I remember we used to go to the theater a lot, and I had a friend in school who had cerebral palsy, and he was a devout Christian. Of course, he did not believe in going to the movies. And the movies were sinful, and the Christians should not go to movies. And of course, I wasn't a Christian, so it didn't affect me. And I used to tease him after I'd gone to the movie during the weekend, I used to tease him about seeing the movie on Monday at the school. I'd say, well, Richard, I saw a real hot movie last week at the theater, And of course, it was just a regular kid's movie, but he said all movies were sinful. So I used to try to make Richard feel bad for being a Christian. And of course, years later, I look back at that and kind of laugh because Christ made me a Christian. And of course, that come back to me. And I was able to talk to Richard many times after that, and we both marvel at the way the Lord works. So we used to go to movies and sporting events just like everyone else. I think one of the things, there's 2 or 3 things that influenced my life more than anything is I think the major thing was when I became a Christian, and not so much when, but the events leading up to when I became a Christian. I think sometimes, looking back in my life, that this one event did more to change my life and to channel in a different direction than anything. A friend of mine in school, an adult friend, used to say that when I was a teenager, when I was 14, 15, 16, she used to say that if something didn't happen, I'd end up in jail because I was always getting in trouble and everything. Not with the police, but with prantics and things like that, and my attitude sometimes. So she, this was her prediction of me. I don't think other people had that prediction, but she did. Like I said earlier, my family never did go to church, never did get involved in things. I remember, and we were very dysfunctional. And I remember, for instance, my mom and dad, first of all, my mom and dad loved me, they said. And I think they demonstrated to the best of their ability. But yet they weren't tuned into my needs, because in a dysfunctional family, the key mark is everybody's tuned into their own needs, and they're not concerned about the next person so much. And I remember many times, because of my polio and having operations, I had to be shed in. I remember one time after an operation, I had a body cast on from under my arms to the tip of my toes. I had to be there for 6 months like that. And of course, Mom and Dad, they had made plans to paint the house and redo the house. Well, where'd that leave me? Right in the middle of the mess. So, and I was miserable all the time. They were banging and hammering and dirtiness. And even in my room, they came in and tore the paper down and started wallpapering around me and all that. And they didn't care how this affected me. They didn't even give it any consideration. And they said, well, you can just continue to lay there and read your books and listen to the radio, and, nothing's going to change. Well, it did change. My whole environment was tore up, and they didn't even relate to it. And I remember another time when I used to have strep throat about every year for about 5 years. I'd have sore throat that would just about turn into strep throat, or did turn into strep throat. It'd come on slowly like a sore throat does, and then finally get to a point where I couldn't even hardly breathe. And then finally say, I guess we better send for a doctor. And they'd send for a doctor. At that time, it's hard to find a doctor to come to the house, but we finally found one. And he came out to the house, and it only took one shot of penicillin, and I was better. But they didn't want to turn loose of a few bucks for penicillin or a doctor. So this is the way my family was. In one respect, they took care of everything. In another respect, they didn't. But this is a dysfunctional family. And I remember one time, like I said, we never went to church, didn't believe in any of that. And I remember one time that the church was giving away baby chickens at Easter time. And I wanted a baby chick. So as a kid, as a small kid, I decided I'd go to church that Sunday just to get the baby chick. So I went to this, I think it was a Christian church in a little town, and so I got my baby chick. I don't remember anything else other than that. So I went on into junior high school, and in junior high I had a homeroom teacher by the name of Mrs. McNally. McNally's now with the Lord. She was a great teacher, good teacher, and I remember she really worked hard on me to help me to learn and learn things. And she cared about me. In fact, one time she wanted to adopt me, but of course Mom and Dad didn't go for that. But anyway, so we didn't get that job done. And I didn't want to leave my brother and family either. So, but anyhow, McNally was a good teacher. She told me one day at school, she said there's going to be a religious class, a half an hour for 5 weeks at the school here, and I want you to go to it. And I said, no, I'm not going to go to that. It's during the break time, the recess period, during lunchtime and recess period. And I didn't want to go sit in another class at recess period. And she said, no, you're going to go to that. It's not going to hurt you to go to that. Well, she got by with that then, but it'd be pretty hard to get by with that today. But anyway, so I was made to go to the religious class, and the only two things I remember that we had to memorize the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want, that whole passage there. And then we were given the Gideon New Testament. That's the only two things I remember out of that class. So I took the Gideon New Testament home, and I cherished it for years. I'd read from it without anybody watching me at night. When nobody was around, or I was in my room by myself. I'd read from it, but I didn't want anybody to see me reading from it. Because remember, I was in a non-Christian home, and we didn't believe in things like that. And besides, I had some neighbors next door who were devout Christians, and they were always witnessing to my family and to me and to everybody. And we did not want to be like them. Even though they were very successful, and you kind of envied them because they had a good home life, and everything seemed to be going well with them. However, we didn't want to be like them. But anyway, I read from the New Testament, and it didn't make sense to me, except for one thing. Everywhere I read, I could understand phrases like, if you confess me before men, I'll confess you before my Father which is in heavens. The words of Jesus. And if you deny me before men, you are denied before my Father which is in heaven. And I read these passages, and I knew that, and I found out that Christ died for me on the cross and all this. And I knew what the Bible taught about these things, but I still didn't believe in a God. I wasn't sure there was a God, and I didn't really believe in a God. But I wasn't sure. I had this concept in my mind that, like I said, that God really didn't exist. And if he did, he really didn't care about us down here. As a teenager, I went out with my brother, did the usual things that teenagers did. And I remember one Good Friday night, as I was in bed going to sleep, I was reading the story of the crucifixion in my Gideon New Testament. And very privately, nobody knew I was doing this in the house. At night when I went to bed and I was praying, I was saying, well, God, Easter Sunday's coming up. We're supposed to celebrate the resurrection. We're supposed to think about Christ coming alive out of the grave after he died on the cross for the sins of the world. Well, God, if you're really up there, I doubt if you're there. And if you're almighty and you're all creative and you're all powerful, you can do anything you want to do whenever you want to do it. If you're really there, God, you're going to be able to tell me so. You're going to be able to communicate with me that you're there. And you're going to be able to make me become a Christian. You're going to be able to do amazing things to reveal yourself if you're really there. But I doubt it. No one's heard from me for 2,000 years that I know of. At least I haven't. And so God said, Easter Sunday's coming up, so if you really want me to trust in you and become a Christian, you're going to have to do something to make me believe you're there. And you're going to have to do it by the day we celebrate the resurrection. Remember, this is Friday night, Good Friday. Oh, I'd say about 10 or so o'clock. And anyway, I went to sleep, and that was all there was to it. On Saturday come around, brother got off work, come home and said, well, I want to go out. Let's go. We're all going, guys are going out and kick around a while. So I went out with him and some of his friends, and we decided to get some liquor. We got a bunch of liquor, and he and his friends and I all went out across the lake. There was two cars. He was driving, I think it was a Bonneville, I believe, or something like that. And there's a little small car of friends too, and the following us, about 4 in that car and 3 in his. And we're going out across the lake, and we're going to have a good time. We're going to get drunk. By the way, the driver of the small car was the son of a preacher. And anyhow, just get that in passing. But anyhow, so we went across the lake, and we got drunker. You wouldn't believe. I'd never been drunk in my life. I think that was the first time I really got blasted. Anyway, we're out across the lake and having a good time, and we decided to come back towards town. It's getting out late. It's about 12:30, something like that, approaching the resurrection Sunday morning. And we come out across the lake, and there's a little one-lane dirt road that went to the main highway. And before you got to the highway, there was a sharp turn to the left, getting to the highway. And if you didn't make that sharp turn, there was a warning sign across, had a warning sign, black and white, warning you that you had to make that sharp turn on this dirt road and keep your speed down so you could make the turn. And if you didn't make the turn, you slide off and you go down the embankment, go through the warning sign, and end up in a cow pasture. And so my brother was in the lead car, and I was in the back seat of the lead car, and the little Corvair was following us. And we were traveling around 90 to 100 miles an hour on this dirt road coming back toward town. And we was really going in. And I was, like I said, I was in the back seat, and I saw a sign that said, "Stop ahead." Now, I realized you can't very well stop a car going 90 miles an hour on a dirt road very, very fast. I said, well, oops, we're not going to make this stop. And I knew there was no way we could make it. And so my brother knew we couldn't make it, so he tried everything he could to slow the car down before he got to the intersection. So he turned the car, and it seemed like, and I know this didn't happen, but it seems like it happened. It seems like everything stopped. It seems like the stars stopped in space. Everything went into slow motion, and everything stopped. And I can't explain it. And in my mind, it echoed the phrase, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And another voice shouting in the other ear, "You're a liar, you never trusted me. He leadeth me by the still waters." And another voice, "You're a liar, you have not trusted me." And the whole psalm seemed like went through my mind, and every time the positive phrase came up, He restoreth my soul. And another voice will say, you're a liar. I have not restored your soul. And every time that came through my mind, I finally said, oh, Lord, just give me another chance. Give me another chance to receive you as Savior and acknowledge you before men. Give me that one more chance. That's all I asked. And evidently God had released the timer on the incident, and we continued. We went through the road, we went through the barricade, we rode 3 or 4 times. And the car followed way back behind us because they couldn't keep up. They said, hey, you guys look like you just vanished off the road. We didn't know what happened to you. And they came up on the intersection, and they looked out in the cow pasture, and there was the car upside down on the top, and the light shining out over the cow pasture. It was a beautiful morning. The stars were twinkling in the sky. It was about 1 o'clock or 1:30 when that happened, Easter Sunday morning. And the stars were twinkling, the radio was blasting from the car, and the guys thought we'd all been killed. Well, they come to find out the one guy in the front seat was thrown out when we went off the road, and he didn't get hurt, but he didn't get hurt. The car kept rolling and finally came to a stop, and my brother crawled out. He didn't get hurt. Now I was the only one left, and I was under the car. And half of me was under the car, half of me wasn't. And they tried to pull me out, and they couldn't. And they finally had to lift the car a little bit to pull me out. And what had happened, it looked like I fell into a hole no bigger than my body. And no bigger than my body and my legs. And I fell in that little hole, and the car formed a bridge over me. And they lifted the car just enough to slide me out. And what had happened, the braces had absorbed the energy and protected me, and my legs weren't broken, and I wasn't even hurt. Now we know it wasn't the braces, it was the Lord, because I believe this day, and some may think I'm silly, but I think the Lord had caused that car to roll and split that ground as I hit it, and made a little hole for me to fall into. And I think He protected me that way. Well, the ambulance finally came, and they took me to the hospital, and I had some big knots on my neck, and they were afraid it might turn into a blood clot or something. And they kept me for 2 or 3 days. But the bottom line was nothing developed. And I had a cut on the top of my head for some stitches. But other than that, no one was really seriously hurt. Well, I know what happened. I know it's God communicating to me. But I did not confess Him as my Savior as I did. I had to think about this. Because I knew if I become a Christian, it's going to cost me something. I also remember reading, before a man builds a house, he counts the cost, Christ said. And I also remember Christ saying something to the effect that, if we confess Him as our Savior, we may have to pay a cost in friends and associates and every other aspect of our life. So anyway, finally, a couple months went by, and the Lord kept nagging me, you got to confess me before men, you got to confess me before men. And finally, I said, okay, Lord, Youth for Christ is coming to town next month. And my neighbors who had been inviting me for a year or so to come to a meeting, I'd always turned them down. I said, if they invite me next time, I will go to the meeting. Well, one day I was out coming back from work, and the neighbor was out doing her garden, and I passed her and said hello. Of course, she used that garden work just to get my attention, I think, when I came home. And she said, I want to talk to you, man. Come on, I want to talk to her. And she says, there's going to be a Youth for Christ meeting this Saturday. We'd like for you to come with us. So I surprised her and said, okay, I'll be there. I'll go with you. So I went to the Youth for Christ meeting and heard the message, and they gave the invitation. As usual, if you'd like to become a Christian, raise your hand. I raised my hand. And then they asked if you would like for you to come forward, somebody in prayer for you and all that. So I was the first one to raise my hand, and I was the first one down the aisle. And the preacher came up to me and he had prayer with me, and he talked to me about salvation. I don't think I heard a word he said, because I already knew what the Lord had done. I already had a conversation with the Lord the Friday before the resurrection. I knew what He did in my life, so I didn't need what He had to say. And I listened to him, and we had prayer, and I went back to where I was seated. And after the meeting was over, the preacher knew the man that brought me to the services, Wayne Easterling and his family. He knew the guy, and Wayne went up to him and asked him, he said, do you think Gary really got through today? And the preacher said, I don't know if he got through or not, I just don't know. Well, he didn't have to know, did he? But I knew, and the Lord knew. And so that next Friday, Mr. Easterling went with a group of businessmen to the county jail every Friday. He asked me if I'd like to go to the county jail and testify what the Lord had done for me. So I said, okay. And that about knocked him over. So I started going to jail service, and the Lord turned my life around. I really got enthusiastic for the Lord, and really got evangelical. And I was witnessing to everybody. I started taking my Bible to high school, and every day I took it with me, and kids would make fun of me. And I took it up into the lounge area at noontime, where my lunch would consist of a candy bar and a Coke. And then I'd lay my books up against the couch with my Bible out front so everybody could see it while they were dancing and listening to the jukebox and on their lunch break to high school. And some made fun of the Bible, but I was surprised at how many students actually showed an interest in it and respected me for it. So anyway, that was my high school experience. I think the next thing that influenced my life was the school I went to afterwards. I felt the call to become active in God's work, but I also knew my limitations, and I didn't know if I really could do it. I could do some pause. And so one of the people I ran into after I became a Christian were a couple that used to be the Andersons, Winona and Elward Anderson. Elward Anderson was born in the Congo. His parents were missionaries. And Elward was the first white boy born in the Congo. So when he went to Tennessee Temple as a young man, he met Mrs. Anderson, Winona Anderson. I forget her maiden name, but anyway, met Winona and they got married and she became Winona Anderson. Anyhow, they were very active in the Lord's work, and he was a minister back here trying to get churches started and active in a little church, and they asked me to help them. So I got started working with them, and they bought a Christian bookstore, and they hired me to work in the bookstore. So anyhow, they were very influential in my life, in how I would serve my life, how I would develop as a Christian. And but the Andersons were very good to me in a lot of ways, and they promoted me and encouraged me to speak at churches, give testimonies, to preach, and even before I was ordained or before I even really had any training. But anyhow, the Andersons told me about Tennessee Temple, Bible school, seminary, and college, and I thought about going, but I knew I didn't have any money, and I knew my dad would not support that. He wanted me to become active in the business, or maybe a bookkeeper or something like that. And I could see the advantage of becoming a businessman too, and I could serve the Lord as a businessman. And it'd be nice to be successful in business and be able to give monies and encourage the Christian ministry in the way of supports and that kind of thing. I saw that as very, very good. So I thought about that for a while, but the Lord was pushed me toward the Bible college, and I decided to go there, but Dad said he wouldn't pay for it. I said I was going anyhow, and I corresponded with the president of the college, and he told me to come on down. If need be, he'd have me talk with some of his friends, and we'd try to get me in that way. But so Dad relinquished, and he decided, okay, I'll pay for 3 years. So he did pay for that, even though isn't a Christian, though he doesn't like Christianity. He did offer to pay for my tuition and my room and board and books for 3 years. So I went down to Tennessee Temple, and I had a great time down there. I had a wonderful time, too good of a time probably. But anyway, I learned a lot. I listened to some of the best speakers in the world, and I realized the Lord was really drawing me to be active in the ministry. A lot of times in my life, I come to the point where I wanted to destroy all my religious books, all my study books, all my books I used in the ministry. And I just wanted to throw them away and forget about them. And I could explain the church away. I could explain believers away. I could kind of put the Bible away. But there's one person I couldn't get around, that was Jesus Christ. And when I looked about how I got saved, and whenever I get depressed or discouraged, I always go back to, how did I get saved? And I realized it's like Ephesians says, God predestined me before the heavens and earth. And it was like Christ died for me. And the Holy Spirit led me to Christ. And then when I heard the word of truth, I believed, and I was sealed by the Spirit of promise. So because of those three things, I cannot reject Christ. I'm sealed. No matter what happens to my life, I cannot lose him because I'm sealed. And then I know why I'm created. He said in Ephesians 2, you're created unto good works that we should do for him.